The woods don't just have eyes. They have memories. I used to think the silence of the forest was a gift, a reprieve from the constant hum of a city that never stops demanding your attention. But after what happened in the Blackwood Range, I've realized that silence isn't an absence of sound. It's a predator holding its breath. My name is Julian. I'm an urban explorer by trade, which is just a fancy way of saying I get paid to trespass in places that God and the government have forgotten. I've stood in the middle of decaying asylums, walked the halls of flooded bunkers, and slept in towns where the only residents were the rust and the weeds. I thought I was desensitized to fear. I thought I knew the difference between a floorboard creaking and a threat. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday. I wanted to find the Old Man's Throat, a legendary cave system deep in the Appalachian stretch that hadn't been mapped since the late 70s. The locals in the town of Oakhaven didn't want to talk about it. They gave me that look, the one where their eyes skip over yours like you're already a ghost. "Don't go following the whistles, son," an old man at the trailhead told me. He was clutching a thermos with hands that shook like dry leaves. "The woods up there, they don't like to be looked at." I laughed it off. I had a GPS, a satellite phone, and enough gear to survive a week. I didn't need superstition. I hiked for 6 hours, the canopy growing so thick that the sun became nothing more than a series of jagged, golden needles piercing the gloom. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic like a penny on your tongue. Around 4 p.m., the forest went dead. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my own boots hitting the pine needles. Thump, thump, thump. Then I heard it. A whistle. It wasn't a bird call. It was 2 notes, rising and then falling, perfectly melodic. It sounded like someone calling for a dog. I stopped. The whistle stopped. I waited for a minute, my heart doing a slow, heavy roll in my chest. I chalked it up to the wind moving through a hollow log. I found the cave. It was a jagged tear in the side of a limestone cliff, draped in ivy that looked like stringy green hair. I set up my camp about 50 yards away from the entrance. As the sun dipped below the ridge, the shadows didn't just lengthen. They seemed to thicken, pooling like spilled ink between the trunks of the ancient oaks. That night, the temperature dropped 40 degrees in an hour. I huddled in my sleeping bag, the thin nylon walls of my tent offering no real protection against the oppressive weight of the dark. I was drifting off when I heard a voice. "Julian." My eyes snapped open. The voice was distant, muffled, but unmistakable. It sounded exactly like my sister, Clara. But Clara was 300 miles away in Cincinnati. "Clara?" I whispered into the dark. "Julian, come look at this," the voice said. It was coming from the direction of the cave. The cadence was perfect. The way she lingered on the N at the end of my name. It was her. I reached for my flashlight, my fingers trembling. I told myself I was dreaming. I told myself it was an auditory hallucination brought on by the thin air and the isolation. But when the voice laughed, that short, breathless giggle Clara gives when she's found something interesting, I couldn't stay in the tent. I stepped out into the night. The moon was a sliver of bone in a black sky. I shone my light toward the cave. The beam cut through the dark, reflecting off the damp stone. "Clara? This isn't funny." The response didn't come from the cave. It came from right behind me. "It's not supposed to be funny, Julian." I spun around. Nothing. Just my tent and the wall of trees. My flashlight beam danced frantically across the bark. Then I saw it. A figure stood about 20 yards away, partially obscured by a thicket of mountain laurel. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs were long and spindly, and it was wearing a jacket that looked exactly like mine. "Who are you?" I screamed, my voice cracking. The figure didn't move. Then it raised a hand and pointed at its own face. As the light hit it, my stomach turned. It didn't have a face. It had a smooth, pale surface where features should be, like a thumb had been pressed into wet clay to erase a portrait. But then, as I watched, the clay began to shift. A nose pulled outward, a mouth tore open, eyes blinked into existence. It was looking at me with my own eyes. I didn't think. I ran. I didn't grab my pack. I didn't grab my keys. I just bolted into the woods, the branches clawing at my face like fingernails. Behind me, I could hear the sound of heavy boots. Thump, 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 and then the whistle. 2 notes, rising and falling. I don't remember the drive home. I remember finding my car, fumbling with the keys while the darkness seemed to press against the windows, and flooring it until the trees gave way to the cold, fluorescent safety of a gas station. I told myself I was having a breakdown. I told myself the stress of the job had finally snapped something in my brain. By the time I pulled into my driveway in the suburbs of Virginia, it was 3 a.m. My house felt like a sanctuary. I locked the front door, turned on every light in the downstairs, and sat on the kitchen floor with a kitchen knife in my hand until the sun came up. When the light of morning finally filtered through the blinds, I felt like an idiot. The entity in the woods was a trick of the light, a fear-induced fever dream. I made coffee. I watched the news. I tried to reclaim my life. But then, I noticed the mud. There were footprints in the hallway. Not just any footprints, they were the exact tread of my hiking boots, the ones I had left at the campsite. They led from the front door, which I had locked, straight to the basement door. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded thin, alien in my own home. From the basement, I heard a sound. It was the sound of someone typing. I recognized it because I spend 10 hours a day at my desk. It was the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of my mechanical keyboard. I crept toward the basement door, the knife held out in front of me. I opened it slowly. The lights were off down there, but the blue glow of my computer monitor illuminated the room. A figure was sitting in my chair. His back was to me. It was wearing my favorite gray hoodie, the one with the frayed sleeves. "Hey!" I yelled, throwing the light switch. The figure didn't flinch. It continued to type. I walked closer, my breath coming in shallow hitches. I grabbed the shoulder of the hoodie and yanked. The chair spun around. It was empty. The hoodie was draped over the back of the seat, but there was no one inside it. My computer screen was open to my journal. "Something followed me home from the woods," the text read. "I think it wants to be me. I think it's doing a better job at it than I am." I backed away, tripping over a stack of boxes. I ran upstairs and grabbed my phone to call Clara. I needed to hear a real voice. I needed to know the world was still sane. The phone rang twice. "Hey, Julian," Clara said. She sounded tired. "Clara, thank God. Something is happening. I went to the cave and I saw something, and now I'm back home, but I think someone is in the house." "I know," she interrupted. Her voice changed. It lost its warmth. It became flat, monotonous. "I know, because you just told me." "What are you talking about?" "I just called you." "No, Julian," she whispered. "You called me 10 minutes ago. You told me you were safe. You told me you were going to sleep. I'm looking at you right now on FaceTime. You're smiling at me." I dropped the phone. From the hallway, I heard the front door open. "Julian? I'm home." It was my voice. Exactly my voice. The same pitch, the same inflection I use when I've had a long day and I'm relieved to be back. I scrambled into the bedroom and locked the door. I could hear footsteps coming up the stairs. They were heavy, deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. "Julian, open up," the voice said from the other side of the wood. "I found your keys. You dropped them by the cave." It was a long walk, but I made it. I pushed my dresser in front of the door, my chest heaving. "Go away. Get out of my house." "But it's our house now," the voice replied. Then I heard it shift. It started to mimic the sound of my breathing, the jagged, panicked gasps. It was mocking me. Suddenly, the house went silent. I waited for hours, clutching the knife until my knuckles turned white. I must have drifted off out of pure exhaustion, because I woke up to the sound of a whistle. 2 notes, rising and falling. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside the room. I looked under the bed. 2 eyes identical to mine stared back, but they weren't in a face. They were just floating in a mass of shifting, pale gray flesh that was slowly taking the shape of my torso. "Don't worry," the thing whispered with my mouth. "I'll take care of Clara. I'll take care of everything." I don't know how I escaped that room. I remember a blur of motion, The feeling of cold, clammy skin brushing against my ankle, and the sound of my own bedroom window shattering as I threw myself through it. I spent the next 3 days living like a ghost. I didn't go to the police. What would I tell them? That a shape-shifting entity from the woods was stealing my mail and calling my sister? They'd put me in a ward, and the thing would probably be the one to sign the commitment papers. I watched my house from the woods behind the property line. I saw him, the other Julian. He looked perfect. He mowed the lawn. He waved to the neighbors. He even wore the watch my father gave me, the one I had lost in the cave. He was better at being me than I was. He didn't have my anxiety. He didn't have my temper. I watched through binoculars as Clara pulled into the driveway. She jumped out of her car and hugged him. He spun her around, laughing. It was the most human I'd ever seen myself look. That was the moment I realized I wasn't fighting for my life. I was fighting for my soul. I waited until nightfall. I knew the house's layout better than anything. I knew which floorboards creaked and which windows didn't lock quite right. I snuck in through the kitchen. The house was quiet, smelling of the pasta dinner he must have cooked for Clara. I found them in the living room. Clara was asleep on the couch. The other Julian was sitting in the armchair, reading a book. My book. I stepped into the light, the knife trembling in my hand. "End this," I hissed. The thing looked up. It didn't look scared. It looked pitying. "You're still here?" it asked. Its voice was a perfect resonance of my own. "You should have stayed in the woods, Julian. It's much more peaceful when you don't have to pretend." "She knows," I said, gesturing to Clara. "She has to know you're not me." The thing stood up. Its movements were fluid, sickeningly graceful. "Does she? I haven't forgotten her birthday. I don't forget to call her back. I'm the version of you that everyone actually liked. Why would she want you back?" I lunged at him. We hit the floor in a tangle of limbs. Fighting him was like fighting a mirror made of muscle. Every move I made, he anticipated. Every blow I struck, he mirrored. "Clara, wake up!" I screamed. Clara stirred. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, squinting at the two identical men wrestling on the floor. "Julian?" she gasped, her voice thick with terror. What is this?" "Clara, it's me," I yelled, pinning the thing's shoulders down. "I'm your brother. Remember the treehouse? Remember the summer at the lake?" The thing beneath me didn't struggle. It just looked at her with tears in its eyes. "Clara, don't listen to him. He's the one from the woods. He's been following me for days. He tried to kill me in the bedroom. He's lying," I roared. Clara stood up, backing away toward the kitchen. She grabbed a heavy glass vase from the side table. Her face was a mask of indecision and pure, unadulterated horror. "Tell me something," she sobbed. "Tell me something only the real Julian would know." I opened my mouth to tell her about the secret we shared, about the time we accidentally broke our father's trophy and hid it in the attic. But the thing spoke first. "The trophy, Clara. The 1994 bowling trophy. We hid it behind the old Christmas decorations. We promised never to tell." My heart froze. How do you know that?" The thing smiled, a slow, predatory peel of the lips. "I told you, Julian. I have your memories. I have your cells. I am you." Clara looked at me, her eyes hardening. She saw my confusion, my hesitation. To her, that was the sign of the imposter. "Get out," she whispered to me. "Clara, no. Get out," she screamed, swinging the vase. It shattered against my shoulder, sending a bloom of white-hot pain through my arm. I looked at the other Julian. He was standing now, moving toward Clara to protect her. He put an arm around her, and she leaned into him, sobbing into his chest. Over her shoulder, he looked at me. His eyes didn't change, but his face did. For a split second, the features melted. The nose vanished. The mouth became a jagged tear. It winked at me. I realized then that I couldn't win. In the eyes of the world, the monster was the better man. I backed out of the house, retreating into the darkness of the backyard. I ran until I hit the tree line. I sat there in the dirt, watching the lights of my home, his home, flicker off one by one. I've been living in these woods for 3 months now. I've grown thin. My clothes are rags. My skin is pale and covered in a fine, grayish grit. I watched the news on a stolen phone yesterday. Julian and Clara are doing great. They're planning a trip to the coast. But there's something the other Julian doesn't know. The woods don't just produce one of us. Last night, I was sitting by my small fire when I heard a whistle. 2 notes, rising and falling. I looked up. A figure was standing across the clearing. It was wearing rags. It was thin. It looked exactly like I do now, the broken, discarded version of Julian. It didn't have a face yet. It was waiting for me to speak so it could steal my voice. I didn't run this time. I stood up and smiled. "Take it," I whispered. "Take the hunger. Take the cold. Take the memory of a sister who couldn't tell the difference." The thing's face began to shift. It mimicked my smile. "Thank you," it said, using my cracked, ruined voice. I walked toward it, handing it my sharpened kitchen knife. "I'm going back to the house tonight. There are going to be 3 of us soon, then 4, then a dozen. We're going to fill that house until there's no room left for the lies. Because the thing that followed me home wasn't a replacement. It was an infection, and I'm finally ready to spread